Welcome to Mystery Sauce, where today's true crime episode delves into the story of Alexei Navalny. Over the last decade, Navalny has emerged as the foremost adversary of Vladimir Putin. On the 16th of February, on Friday, the Russian Correctional Service announced that Navalny had suffered a fatal collapse during a walk at a Siberian prison colony, where he was serving a 30-year term for alleged extremism and fraud. However, challenging Putin's authority was his true offense. 3 years prior, Navalny made a critical decision. He chose to return to Moscow, fully aware of the imminent risk of arrest. This decision came shortly after he narrowly escaped an assassination attempt. Upon his arrival back in Russia in 2021, his arrest was imminent. This episode will explore the reasons behind Navalny's return to Moscow. This act was a stark demonstration of his political importance and defiance, a move that now appears to have been a direct cause of his demise. Alexei Navalny. He lies comatose in a Berlin hospital in Germany, where he has been for several days, following a poisoning by Russian state secret agents using a nerve agent. Remarkably, he survives, despite the lethal intent of the dose. The poison took effect aboard a plane in Siberia, causing him excruciating pain. Subsequently, he found himself at the mercy of doctors in Berlin, who were too intimidated by Vladimir Putin to undertake the necessary measures to save him. Though stable, he remains unconscious. Meanwhile, Russian authorities have declared that he is breaching his parole. Navalny represents the most significant challenge to Putin's rule in 17 years. The previous notable Russian opposition figure, Boris Nemtsov, was assassinated near the Kremlin, and unlike Nemtsov, who never saw the presidency, Navalny did attempt to run. In 2018, he campaigned on an anti-corruption agenda, daring to vocalize thoughts many Russians would even silently entertain, accusing Putin of theft and of plundering the nation. Throughout this ordeal, Navalny emerged as the foremost adversary of Putin. Following his poisoning in the summer of 2020, he was airlifted to Berlin, where he endured a month of recovery in the hospital, a period plagued by vivid hallucinations, including fantasies of becoming Dr. Octavius from the Spider-Man series. Scenes reminiscent of a fear and loathing experience. At his side was his wife, Julia, who Navalny believes played a pivotal role in his survival. During his recuperation, she would play Duran Duran songs for him and update the media and boldly confront Putin. Julia assumed his mantle, and in less than 6 months following the near-fatal attack, Alexei and Julia undertook a daring act that captured global attention and prompted widespread speculation. They returned to their homeland. This act of profound defiance, the narrative of how Alexei Navalny and his wife knowingly walked into a potentially lethal snare, poses a question. Could this gamble, amid the ongoing turmoil, shift Russia's political landscape and potentially elevate them to a position of power? Putin's war on Ukraine raises two pivotal questions. The first concerns whether he will emerge victorious or face defeat on the battlefield. The second revolves around his grip on power in Moscow. Will it remain unchallenged, or could this conflict lead to his downfall? The outcome of this latter question may well hinge on the actions of the Navalnys. After a month filled with surreal hallucinations, Alexei was discharged from the hospital, with German authorities confirming the use of Novichok, a throwback to a Cold War-era assassination attempts that failed once again. Despite the international outcry and condemnation of Putin for this assassination attempt, tangible repercussions were notably absent, reinforcing the notion that it was hardly an attempt in Putin's view. Putin himself later clarified the situation. A few months after Navalny's hospital discharge, Putin remarked, "If Russia's special services had truly intended to eliminate Navalny, they would have succeeded. His wife appealed to me, and I immediately ordered his release to Germany for medical treatment. This is but a scheme to discredit the leadership." Shortly thereafter, Navalny showcased his knack for narrowing media attention and striking at the heart of matters. In an almost unbelievable turn of events, he released a video where, through a prank call, he and an accomplice managed to coax a confession from a senior FSB agent involved in the assassination attempt on him, highlighting Navalny's audacity and media savvy. Hello, the agent's name was Konstantin. The video became the second most watched clip on the Navalny's YouTube channel, just behind one shot 5 years earlier in which drones revealed a Narish-color 5 luxury estates owned by then Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev. That video has since notched up almost 30 million views. Putin was already threatening Alexei Navalny with jail, and he now demanded a suspended sentence for parole violation. Now, parole violation, let's remember, while in a coma, Kafka wouldn't have dared it, right? But that wasn't the point. The point was that Putin was throwing down a gauntlet. The Navalny picked it up. How could they not? Oh, there was a power couple in Russia's endangered opposition. Oh, for it, they had dirt under their fingernails from a long street fight with Putin's thugs, or at least Alexei did. But they also had glamorous good looks, 2 beautiful children, his charisma, her strength, their ongoing love affair from the moment of Alexei's poisoning. Julia had stepped up. She got him to the hospital in Berlin by demanding publicly that Putin let him go. She supervised his recovery. She and Alexei then jointly took their fateful decision. It was simple. They said Moscow was their home. I'm not afraid to come back to Russia. We are absolutely coming back to Russia. Alexei posted on social media. Russia is my country. Moscow is my city. I miss it. And so on January 17th of last year, the world turned to watch as Mr. and Ms. Navalny made their way to Berlin airport. A large crowd had gathered outside Berlin airport, and everyone was waiting for Julian and Alexei to arrive. One of the waiting crowd was Polina Iva at the time. She was a Reuters Russian correspondent, and the plane boarded in, and Navalny had announced beforehand what the flight he would be taking. And the plane was filled with journalists. The plane was packed. So that Navalny, during the flight, he did his last initial few statements. And then much the rest of the flight was spent with his wife. It was a pretty heart-wrenching and heartwarming picture at the same time. They watched cartoons on their phones, held hands, and obviously the anxiety grew. As they approached Russia right before takeoff, Alexei posted on Instagram a clip of Julia saying, "Bring us some vodka." "Boy, we are flying home." It's a line from a Russian gangster film. It's not clear if she got any, but it might have taken the edge off things as they were closing in on Moscow and whatever Putin had in store for them. Navalny watched an episode of Rick and Morty, the cartoon about interdimensional adventures in family. The flight was live-streamed in its entirety by Doj, the independent Russian television channel. Hundreds of thousands of viewers were captivated by the unfolding drama, far beyond the political ramifications it carried. This moment represented reality television at its most authentic and thrilling. The motivations and thoughts of the Navalnys remain largely a mystery, difficult to discern and now nearly impossible to probe. Yet to the outside world, they displayed utter fearlessness. Alexei Navalny, in particular, maintained his characteristic approach towards risk and peril, showing unwavering confidence in his actions and beliefs. He frequently expressed his deep connection to Russia, asserting his undeniable right to return to his own homeland, convinced of his innocence. Fellow passengers relayed that Alexei Navalny chuckled and brushed off concerns about potential arrest with a dismissive laugh. His mantra, "Everything's gonna be alright," became a hallmark of his attitude. In retrospect, this sentiment seems simultaneously poignant, courageous, and naively optimistic. This was particularly true as it was already evident that not everything would turn out fine. The aircraft was scheduled to land at Vnukovo Airport, but as it neared its destination with the cabin lights dimmed for landing, the pilot announced over the intercom that they were experiencing technical difficulties, indicating an unexpected turn of events. Then there was a moment of silence before it became apparent that the aircraft was changing directions. The pilot announced over the radio that they would be diverting to, and I'm going to butcher this name, Sheremetyevo Airport, clearly aware that this detour was no mere coincidence, but fully cognizant of the unfolding drama on board. In the lead-up, Alexei and Julia had been openly defiant about their intentions, from declaring their return to Moscow to specifying their exact flight. It seemed as though they had accepted Putin's challenge, openly inviting him to confront them and their followers. The journey from Volkov to Sheremetyevo encircles Moscow's outer ring road, taking about an hour's drive. Upon their arrival at Sheremetyevo, a large group of Navalny supporters and members of the press were already there to greet them. Despite being deprived of a grand reception at their intended destination by Putin, the Navalnys managed to attract a significant gathering at their actual point of arrival. The event did not resemble a triumphant return. It was more of an act of protest and defiance than a victorious homecoming. This sentiment was reinforced as the anticipation of their arrival had spread before they even reached the passport control. Alexei paused in front of a prominent image of the Kremlin, attracting a sizable media crowd, including around 20 journalists who had accompanied him on the flight. He delivered a brief speech, reiterating his lack of fear, a message that had become a hallmark of his stance. As they approached passport control, the situation deteriorated. They encountered a group of officers donned in masks, white gloves, and black uniforms. The emotional peak of this encounter was Alexei's farewell to his wife, Julia, punctuated by his repeated inquiries to the officers about being detained. After a heartfelt goodbye through the gate, he was escorted away, leaving Julia surrounded by a swarm of reporters. Julia remained composed, not showing any visible signs of distress. She requested some time to process the events and collect her thoughts. Her departure was marked by an impressive scene with a large crowd at the airport and onlookers from the balconies above applauding her. She was met by Navalny's brother Oleg, who along with another supporter, who presented her with flowers. They joined her. Clutching the flowers, she braved the freezing cold weather outside, where a crowd had been eagerly awaiting her appearance. This was 5 months after Putin had nearly succeeded in poisoning her husband with Novichok, only to detain him again. As Alexei was led away, Julia emerged in real time as a symbol of defiance, opposition, and resilience, ready to embrace this new role if she chose. Now, before entering the car, she echoed her husband's earlier sentiments in a brief speech, asserting her fearlessness and reaffirming that Alexei was too unafraid. To all appearances, Alexei Navalny had willingly entered into a situation akin to walking directly into the trap set by Vladimir Putin, symbolized by handcuffs metamorphically left him at the airport. Surrounded by a throng of journalists and reporters stood Julia Navalny, embodying pride and defiance akin to her spouse, while mentally fortifying herself during his absence. Intriguingly, despite Navalny's physical absence, it felt as though he was very much present. In now follow-up to the successful release of the FSB confession video, Navalny's team unveiled another meticulously prepared project. It entitled Putin's Palace. This was an in-depth investigation running close to 2 hours into a lavish presidential compound situated along the Black Sea coastline. The production, which revealed the estate's alleged nearly billion-dollar expense, placed Alexei Navalny on the forefront against the backdrop of Putin's opulent excesses. In one notable scene, 3 individuals are seen piloting a drone from a small inflatable boat, with the waters offering a view of the immense mansion, secluded yet grandiose, reminiscent of the scale of Versailles. The documentary quickly went viral, attracting over 120 million views within 4 days of its release. Following this, Russia's witnessed significantly public dissent, with tens of thousands taken to the streets in various cities a week later, marking some of the largest protests since 2012, when opposition to Putin's 3rd presidential term has spread well beyond Moscow and St. Petersburg. Among the protesters was Julia Navalny, highlighting the significance of both her and Alexei's presence in Russia. Maria Lipman, a respected figure in Russia's liberal academic circles and a longtime Moscow resident, now in exile in Armenia, reflected on Navalny's decision to return to Russia. She posted that he had chosen to stay abroad. It could have marked the end of his political career. Over the years, Navalny demonstrated a fearless stance against persecution, prosecution, harassment, and physical attacks, showing he was undaunted by the prospect of imprisonment. His decision to return fully aware of the likely lengthy incarceration that awaited him, raised questions about whether he viewed this as a self-sacrifice intended to invigorate and galvanize public protest in Russia. While the growing momentum of opposition was palatable, it seemed to pale in comparison to Putin's wrath. Navalny was later seen in a glass enclosure, awaiting a judicial verdict that would decide his fate. He faced imprisonment that very evening for breaching his probation conditions. Merely days after his return, Navalny received a nearly 3-year sentence to a correctional facility. In a tender moment before his departure, he formed a heart with his hands towards his wife, symbolizing love. Upon receiving his sentence, Alexei traced a heart onto the courtroom's barrier, echoing the gestures of affection from the wives, girlfriends, and partners of Belarusian dissenters, previously detained for challenging the authority of Alexander Lukashenko. During the pivotal moment, Julia donned a red garment, a choice laden with meaning. There's Kaya Frova. She introduced herself as a fashion journalist from Moscow, previously penning articles about fashion for prestigious publications such as Russian Vogue and Interview Russia, among others. The verdict against Alexei deeply affected Kaya, prompting her to seek a form of activism that could resonate with her audience. Despite her fashion-centric career, she felt compelled to engage her followers, predominantly women, less inclined towards political matters, in a form of protest that felt safe and relatable. Consequently, Kaya shared a message on her social media platforms, encouraging others to wear red in solidarity with Julia under these grim circumstances. This initiative saw thousands of Russian women sharing selfies and red attire, a gesture of support and hope. This movement attracted even those typically disinterested in politics, offering them a way to empathize with Julia as women, wives, and mothers. Kaya believes that Julia's potentially political influence is significant, with many ready to support her should she decide to pursue a political role. Julia's steadfastness, a strategic acumen during Alexei's poisoning, and her subsequent composed resistance have shifted public perception both within Russia and internationally. Following Alexei's incarceration, there's a growing wave of support for Julia, now dubbed the First Lady of the Opposition. In Russia, media outlets such as Bloomberg and Vanity Fair have highlighted her importance, when Bloomberg referring to her as Alexei Navalny's secret weapon, and Vanity Fair naming her Russia's real First Lady. Kaya sees Julia as a formidable inspiration, noting her effort to remain as apolitical as possible amidst calls for her to enter the political arena. She consistently emphasizes, "This is my family, my husband, who I'm supporting unconditionally." This perspective deeply resonates with many Russian women, even those typically disengaged from political discourse, contributing to her iconic status for individuals like Kaya. She admires Julia for her unwavering strength, resilience, and her ability to navigate through tumultuous times. Julia remained conveying to the CBS News program 60 Minutes that their decision to return to Moscow was seemingly daunting was actually straightforward. To them, returning home to a place of love was the simplest choice. This stance invites belief, yet also sparks curiosity about whether the Navalnys were inadvertently playing into Putin's strategy rather than executing their own. Alexei, during a hunger strike, communicates to Julia his weight loss, while his doctor publicly urges that she be allowed to visit him 2 months following his sentences as protests subside. Meanwhile, Putin is strategizing. The Navalny's anti-corruption group, the FBK, faces arrest, with its members being labeled extremists by June. Those not detained are fleeing abroad, and the government tightens its grip on censorship, enacting laws that mandate a governmental license for educational content. Open Russia, initiated by exile oligarch Mika Kovatsky, and Memorial Russia's leading human rights organization, are both compelled to shut down, erasing two of the largest opposition forces and effectively the nation's moral compass. The political opposition within Russia has virtually vanished. Maria views the preceding year as a pivotal moment in Putin's suppression of dissent, Navalny's arrest galvanized the public, prompting widespread protests across various locales. A response similarly anticipated by the Kremlin, which then clamped down on these demonstrations with severe force. In 2021 was marked by an intensified crackdown on media freedoms, increased restrictions, and harsher penalties for those challenging government policies. Navalny's organization and its affiliates, now branded as extremists, face obliteration, not just in name but also through legal action against anyone associated with or supporting these entities, with laws being enforced retroactively. This represents a decade-long effort to cleanse Russian society of dissent, reaching its zenith. Concurrently, Putin is setting the stage for broader regional assertiveness, amassing military forces at the Ukrainian border, signaling a tightened grip on power both within Russia and potentially beyond Russia's borders. Now, as we all know, on February 24th, Putin initiated what many consider unthinkable a full-blown invasion in Europe, casting the spotlight once more on Ukraine. However, 60 miles east of Moscow, near a small town named Bokhorov, another confrontation was unfolding against Navalny. Within the confines of his prison colony, a courtroom became the stage for Navalny's battle against new fraud allegations, which according to all evidence presented were unfounded. The underlying objective was to render Navalny invisible and irrelevant. The proceedings, much like the conflict initiated by the Kremlin, encountered unexpected challenges. A principal witness summoned by the prosecution declined to give testimony, dismissing the changes as ludicrous. It was also disclosed by Navalny's team that the judge had received direct communications from the presidential administration mid-trial. Nonetheless, the essence of state oppression lies not in these obstacles but in the final outcome: a verdict of up to 9 years in a maximum security facility for supposed embezzlement. Recent reports indicate that two of Navalny's attorneys who had plans to challenge the verdict were detained, though they were believed to have been subsequently released. The potential for a successor to Navalny is dim, with no one matching his influence. Navalny's circle, once vibrant with individuals of remarkable courage and talent, now finds itself scattered, with members either in prison or in exile. Navalny stood as the emblematic leader, the heart and soul of their cause, uniquely embodying the potential for public leadership. Amidst the ongoing war, Putin's rhetoric intensified, particularly in speech 2 weeks into the conflict, where he vehemently criticized the liberal pro-Western segment of society, labeling them as a fifth column of betrayers. This broadside wasn't solely directed at prominent figures like Navalny, but extended to all dissenters against the Kremlin narrative, including individuals like Kaya Fedorova, who left Russia as the invasion commenced. Putin's disparagement of these critics as traitors and inauthentic Russians has not dampened their patriotism or their love for their homeland. As Putin continues to suppress dissent within Russia and scatter its proponents globally, he not only separates them from their kin, but also distorts their narratives, striving to alienate them from their communities. Despite these challenges, there remains a hope among the exiled, like Fedorova, who feature reconciliation in the construction of cultural bridges between the people of Russia and Ukraine, highlighting the tragedy of not just the conflict's human toll, but the personal rifts it has caused, tearing apart families and ending friendships. Should one attempt to pinpoint the location of the Russian opposition on a map, Istanbul in Turkey, Tbilisi in Georgia, or Yerevan, the capital of Armenia, might come to mind. However, this will not accurately reflect the widespread dispersion of the opposition across the globe, as highlighted by Polina Ivanova. Currently, Moscow is notably absent from the list of places where one might encounter opposition members, largely due to the city's challenging environment for such individuals. This dispersion paints a somber picture, yet it is within the context that Yulia Navalny's influence may still resonate. Following her husband's sentencing to 9 years in a prison colony, Yulia turned to Instagram to share a family photo, an act of seldom seen from Putin. She captioned it with a statement on the importance of family for any ordinary person, and even more so for a genuine politician. This portrayal of the Navalny family, captured in a moment of laughter and unity at the dinner table, starkly contrasts with the solitary and often stern images of Putin presented to the Russian public over the past 2 decades. This divergence led to reflections on the rarity of seeing a familial side of a president in Russia, reminiscent of leaders like Boris Johnson, Barack Obama, or even Donald Trump, and evoking memories of Boris Yeltsin's era. The suggestion that Yulia Navalny should assume her husband's political legacy misses a crucial point, especially considering the risk associated with becoming a visible opposition figure in Russia. Julia's ability to remain outside the immediate grasp of political targeting might be where her true strength lies, or so the hopeful thinking goes. Amidst the dire situation in Ukraine and the desire for a resolution aligning with their preferences, many hold on to this hope, even as Putin's inner circle continues to consolidate support around him, motivated by either fear or genuine endorsement of his policies. The Russian state media have historically minimized or entirely overlooked coverage of government critics, and this pattern persisted with the initial reporting on Alexei Navalny's alleged death. In Russia, where state TV commands the largest viewership, Navalny's death received scant attention initially, with significant delays before any mention occurred on the leading channels, Channel 1 and Russia 1, at almost 45 minutes and an hour after the news broke, respectively. These early reports lacked any background on Navalny or the reasons for his imprisonment. In one instance, his full name was omitted, simply referring to him as Navalny, while promising a comprehensive investigation into his death. Attempts by a liberal politician to offer condolences on another state TV channel were swiftly dismissed by the hosts, questioning its relevance to the discussion. Consciously, on social media, the situation unfolded differently. Navalny's death dominated trends on X, formerly known as Twitter, and was widely discussed on Telegram, where it quickly became one of the most viewed topics, attracting views in the hundreds of thousands, with now over 1 million within hours. Despite Navalny's team not having confirmed the news, numerous notable personalities who supported him expressed disbelief and sorrow. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, a former oligarch-turned-critic of Putin, attributed the responsibility for Navalny's untimely demise directly to Vladimir Putin on Telegram, a sentiment echoed by other opposition figures. And on the other hand, some pro-government voices suggested that entities other than President Putin might benefit from Navalny's sudden passing. Margarita Simonyan, the chief editor of the state international broadcaster RT, dismissed Western reactions, implying Navalny had long been irrelevant and his death served no strategic purpose, especially before the elections. Similarly, Antonov Gorishkiv of Channel 1 dismissed Navalny's relevance, hinting at the possibility of his death being an accident or the result of sabotage. Maria Zakharova, the spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry, pointed out the rapidity of the Western response, noting the absence of a forensic examination, yet the readiness of Western conclusions. This narrative underlines the Kremlin's expectation of President Putin securing a fifth term amidst an ongoing crackdown on dissent. Now, Navalny passed was confirmed at 2:17 p.m. on February 16th, as conveyed to his mother with the information shared by his spokesperson, Kira Yarmyshyn, on X on Saturday. This marked the first acknowledgement from Navalny's circle. Yarmyshyn referenced a source from the Polar Wolf Arctic prison colony, revealing that the 47-year-old serving a 19-year sentence had his body collected by the Russian investigative community's investigators and transported to Salikar. Yarmyshyn demanded the immediate return of Alexei Navalny's remains to his family. Salikar, close to the prison complex, was where research was being conducted, and according to her, further updates from Yarmyshyn indicated that the cause of Navalny's death was still under investigation. Despite a second autopsy being conducted, she mentioned on X that results supposedly to be released the following week were pending. Yarmyshyn accused the authorities of deceit to delay the return of Navalny's body. Ivan Zhandova, director of Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation, revealed on X that prison officials had informed Navalny's mother of her son's death due to sudden death syndrome. Navalny's mother, Lyudmila Navalny, accompanied by one of his lawyers, found the local morgue in Salikar closed on Saturday, with Navalny's body missing from its reported location. Yamarash later stated that Navalny's body would not be released to his family until the investigation concluded. She also noted the authorities' recent claim of concluding the investigation without finding any criminal elements, accusing them of misleading and obstructive tactics. Russian officials reported Navalny's unconsciousness and subsequent death following an outdoor walk in the Karp prison colony, which is located about 1,200 miles northeast of Moscow. His death removes a significant challenger to Putin, noted for organizing large-scale protests against the Kremlin and campaigning against corruption, just before an election that would extend Putin's tenure by 6 years. Yamarash, in a Reuters interview, affirmed the continuity of Navalny's vision for Russia through his team's efforts, despite their profound loss. She described Navalny as embodying the fight for a democratic Russia, characterized by fair elections, judicial independence, free press, and prosperity. Now, following Navalny's death, Russian police have detained over 170 individuals nationwide at memorials and rallies in his honor, with reporting significant arrests, especially in St. Petersburg. The crackdown on pro-Navalny demonstrations highlights the stringent anti-dissent laws in Russia. Navalny's death has drawn international condemnation from U.S. President Joe Biden, directly implicating Putin and European Council President Charles Michel, holding the Russian regime accountable for the tragedy. So what do you guys think? Was Navalny possibly murdered by Putin's regime? We know there was a couple assassination attempts on his life, and this was probably the one that did it for him, so Putin could get rid of his competition when he runs for election again. So leave your thoughts in comments, and that will do it for today's story. If you enjoyed this story and would love to hear more, then please hit the like and subscribe button, and even use the comment button to leave any suggestion. Thanks for joining me. See you on the next one.